Hello everyone, welcome to Deeksha online classes. Today we are going to go through a new topic named living world. What is living world? What is living and what is life? Life is a complex physiochemical system which we need to understand. In life or in any living organism, there is composition such as carbohydrates, proteins, lipids and nucleic acids. These all comprises or forms molecules. These molecules come together and form cell, and cell further forms into tissue. Tissue forms into organs. Organs forms into organ system. That further forms into organism, which forms life or a living form. Now, we are going to understand the same in today's class. Now, from living to non-living thing, how do you differentiate? We differentiate living from non-living thing based on certain characteristics. What are these characteristics? We are going to see the first section of the chapter regarding this. But before I start that, I would like to highlight one organism named virus. Virus is a very complex form. It is inactive or lifeless when it is just like a particle outside any organism. Or sometimes you can see it very highly active and it multiplies very rapidly inside a living system. So, because of this nature of the viruses, virus was never classified into any living system. So, we can in other words tell virus is a obligatory host or obligatory parasite, meaning to tell it needs a host 100%. Without a host, it would never survive. Now, let's understand one by one all the general characteristic features. The first and foremost general characteristic feature we are going to come across is organic based component. What is present in organism? So, just now I have told you what are the organic components what we have in our body: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids and nucleic acids. These are very important complex substances which is present as chemicals in our body. So, the first most characteristic feature is that when these chemicals are present and they form into cell, the organism or the substance could be living. The second important fact is growth. Increase in size is very important characteristic. But is it a defining feature? We will come to it shortly. All organisms grow. You can see a seed germinating to form a plant, a small baby growing into a elder individual. So, this is a very important characteristic to understand living organisms. Now, how is this growth controlled? This is controlled by DNA. We all know DNA is the genetic material. This genetic material which is present in our body will control the entire living organism, including growth. Next important characteristic feature is metabolism. Metabolism has two parts. anabolism and catabolism. Anabolism is synthesis, catabolism is breakdown. These two comprises together to form metabolism. Another next characteristic we are going to study is homeostasis. Homeostasis is overall internal environment to be maintained in a very constant condition. Let's take few examples to understand. First, temperature. Now, we all would have suffered from fever sometime or the other. What happens? How do you diagnose fever? The first symptom is our body temperature increases by couple of degrees. Just change in 1 or 2 degree, how can our body feel so weak? The answer is enzymes. Enzymes in our body has specific temperature to function. So, generally in human we know our body temperature should be 37 degrees centigrade. When it is increased or decreased, the enzymes present in them becomes inefficient. They cannot function properly, because of which our body has a very important work to maintain a constant internal environment. In this case, it would be temperature. Our entire body fluid has specific pH, starting from our saliva, going down into our stomach, our blood, every single part. Let's take an example of our stomach. Stomach condition is very highly acidic. It is approximately 1 pH, which is highly acidic. May I know the reason behind it? Yes, the main reason behind is for digestion. Another reason we could also consider as if there is any kind of contamination or microbial growth, it kills or all the microbes present there. Now we will concentrate on the first point, digestion. In presence of 1 pH, our enzymes which is present in stomach functions efficiently. On the other hand, if the pH is increased towards basic region, this enzyme digestion do not happen to its fullest. So, maintaining a constant internal environment is very important. Next point we will be highlighting is response to stimuli. Response is something only a living organism can do. It is a very defining feature of any living organism. If I see a snake, I would start running away from it. This is a response to the stimuli such as snake. We all have heard about touch me not plant, Mimosa pudica. This plant, the moment you touch, the leaves close. We have read about pitcher plant. The moment there is an insect which sits on the leaf lamina, the pitcher closes. These are certain responses to the stimuli what we see. This is very important for us to understand. Now one by one we will be understanding the characteristic feature in detail. The first characteristic feature we are going to understand is growth. Growth, a very important feature to be understood, though it is not a defining feature. Let's see what happens. I have a living organism, and on the other hand, I also have a non-living organism or non-living thing. Let's take examples. In this case, I have human, and I will also take one more example as amoeba. Non-living thing, I will take an example as iron. Let's see whether each of them grow. A human baby grows into an adult. This kind of growth, which happens to be lengthwise, it is called as primary growth. Once the child has attained its puberty, they stop growing lengthwise, but the person could always grow fat or could reduce to become thin. So, growing fat is a girth-wise growth what you are seeing. This is a secondary growth. Now, let us see in case of non-living thing. Iron gets rusted and you can see a deposition which is happening at the top of iron. Can I say it as growth? Yes, the amount surely has increased. But look at the two difference. In human baby, when it is growing to form into an adult, the growth is internal. Whereas, in case of iron, the deposition is external. In other words, can I say in non-living things, growth happens through accumulation. Whereas, in living things, the growth happens internally. I would like to take another example, amoeba or any unicellular organism. In this case, one cell divides to form into two cells. Now, what happens? This becomes the mother cell and these two becomes daughter cell. Surely we can see growth here also, because growth here is in terms of number. Number of cells have increased. But can I also refer this to as reproduction? Yes. So, in living organism, especially in case of unicellular organism, increase in number of cell is both growth and reproduction. But in case of larger multicellular organism, increase in number of cell is only referring to as growth. Another point I would like to raise here is in case of plants. Plants versus animals. Animals grow up till puberty, especially in terms of primary growth. So, can I say that this kind of growth is definite? Yes. But in case of plants, especially in perennial plants, you see the plant is growing and growing and it grows until death. So, we have an indefinite growth, or we also call it as indeterminate growth. Nobody can tell what will be the final height of a given plant. It keeps growing till its die. But in case of animals, at a certain age, there is the stopping of growing further. So, an animal do not grow further after a given time. So, what did we understand in growth? First thing, there are two types of growth based on primary and secondary growth. Primary growth we see in case of length, and secondary growth we see in terms of girth. We also saw determinate growth, that is a fixed growth in case of animals, and in case of plants indeterminate growth. So, moving further on, we see here that non-living things, as I was giving you an example, mountains, boulders and sand mounds also grow, but all these are accumulation and not from within, whereas in living system the growth is from inside. You can see in the given two pictures, in this case a plant is growing, from a germinating part till a bigger plant, and in this case you can see the embryological growth of a small human baby. The next characteristic we are going to highlight is reproduction. Reproduction is another very important characteristic of any living organism. All organisms prefer to have continuity of species. So, one organism giving rise to its own species is called as reproduction. So, we have different types of reproduction such as sexual and asexual. Sexual reproduction is also called as amphimixis. Amphimixis means two gametes, one being female gamete, the other being male gamete, fuse together to form zygote, which grow into a embryo and further into an individual. So, in sexual reproduction, fusion of gamete and forming zygote is the most important step. But in case of asexual reproduction, one organism dividing into two organisms through the process called as cell division happens. So, in other forms, if I have to tell, sexual reproduction brings in variation, whereas asexual reproduction forms clones because there is no genetic variation. I could also restate my statement telling that in case of asexual reproduction, one organism gives rise to two organisms. Though the first organism is missing, but it exists in the form of younger forms. So, there is no natural death. So, should I otherwise tell that unicellular organisms are immortal? We could state so. Now, we are going to look into one by one all the examples. The first example here is in terms of fungi. Fungi multiply and spread easily due to asexual spores. In this given picture, you could see how these spores one by one can differentiate and form into new organism. These spores are grown in a structure which is a fruiting body. Based on the class of the fungi, the fruiting body also varies. But in general, all the fruiting body bears the fruit which we call it as spores, and each spore grow into an individual further. In case of yeast, hydra and hydra, we see a process called as budding. This is an exogenous budding. What happens here? What do you mean by exogenous? Exo means external, genus is the body. So, you can see an external growth happening outside the body, which then pinches off and forms into two individuals. Another example in case of fungi and various filamentous algae and also the Protonema mosses. What is Protonema mosses? It is also the filamentous mosses, which is seen in the juvenile stage of the moss. In the juvenile stages of the moss, you see filamentous mosses. All of them look something like this. One cell separated with the other in a linear manner. These forms undergo multiplication through another asexual reproduction named as fragmentation. Here, what happens is each cell behaves like an individual. They separate and grow into further cells. So, this process is called as fragmentation. So, now here you can see there is one organism and the second organism. This is called as fragmentation. The next example we are seeing is in terms of amoeba. The example which we have already seen once. In this case, the cell division or binary fission leads to formation of two daughter cells. And in this case, you also see that one cell giving rise to two cells can be defined as growth. It can also be defined as reproduction. And hence we state it as in single celled organism there is no clear cut definition or differentiation between growth and reproduction. But reproduction, can it be a characteristic or defining feature of any living organism? No. We have several examples where organisms do not reproduce. The first example is in terms of mules. What are mules? When we have interspecies hybridization, what do you understand by interspecies hybridization? Here we have two different species of organisms which is been hybridized for human purposes. Here you can see a horse and a donkey is mated and the production is mule. Now, trying to define back species, we understand species is a group of animals with similar characteristics and can interbreed and produce a viable and fertile offspring. I repeat, the points what we understand in terms of in any species is a species should be a group of individual which on mating produce fertile offspring. But in this case, what did we do? We have interbred two different species organisms. In such a scenario, the end result will be always a sterile organism. Next example is on sterile worker bees. Now, in this picture you can see this is the queen bee, which is a female and fertile. This is a male bee, which is so. The next thing we are understanding is in terms of male honeybees. They are very much fertile here. But what are these? These are worker bees. These are female but sterile. Let's move on to the next slide to understand metabolism, another characteristic feature. What is metabolism? Metabolism is sum total of all the chemical reactions occurring in our body is called as metabolism. If I have to sum up, it can be told as catabolism, that is breakdown, plus anabolism, that is synthesis, is called as metabolism. Metabolic reactions are technically to be happening inside a living organism, but certain times or in our chemistry labs or bio labs we can see that we do reactions even outside, say in case of a test tube. But we should understand that metabolic reactions which is happening in a organism is the one which we use the word as metabolism and not as reaction. If you are looking at this pic, even though it is an in vitro condition what we are doing or in an experimental setup, we are doing reactions to produce living organisms. Hence, we can call metabolism to be as a defining feature of all living organisms. The next one is the most important characteristic feature. What is it? Consciousness, or in other words, should I say, response to stimuli. Now, as I was giving you example some time back, that if I see a snake, I would surely run away or try to fight against it. If I touch a Mimosa pudica plant, that is a touch me not plant, the leaf closes. Now these are small little things in nature which we understand and respond to. Now these responses are due to a factor called as irritability. Assume a friend of yours is continuously poking you. What do? You first tell don't, second say I'm getting irritated, you stop, third probably you also start poking. So this is a response to the stimuli which is created by your friend. Are all sense organ work towards it? Say for example, if I bring a pencil near your eye, your eyelids will close. A nice good aroma of mummy's cooking can immediately make your mouth start watering. Your olfactory to the part of your tongue, it has worked. Touch, I suddenly touch something hot unknowingly, I will immediately drop. These are all the sense organs what we are trying to make it work based on the stimuli created. If someone calls you from behind, your name, you tend to turn. These are because of awareness or consciousness. So this is the most important feature in all living organisms. But as we know, we are humans. We are a step ahead of other organisms. We don't only have consciousness, we also have something called as self-consciousness. We are aware of ourselves. I don't have to be irritated or stimulated by somebody else to make myself feel that how is my face, in what expression I am in, what position or posture I am maintaining, or what I am talking. So this is self-consciousness. Even without an external stimulus, our body can respond. In the first pic here, it is a Mimosa pudica or touch me not plant. So in this plant, if we touch the leaf, immediately the leaf closes. In the second plant, which is an insectivorous plant, you can see the leaf lamina is closing down on the insect. And finally the humans, which exhibits self-consciousness. So this is the most important defining feature. Next come interaction. Based on all the other characteristics, we come to a point as interaction. Interactions are of various types. I interacting to you, you interacting to me back, and so on. But in this case of living organisms, we are speaking of a different level of interaction. Interaction can be among cell organelles. Let's try to understand this. Now, this is a cell inside which I have nucleus. Inside the nucleus, I have DNA. DNA, which is the genetic material. It is carrying a lot of information. This DNA synthesizes mRNA or a RNA which carries message. Where does it carry message to? It carries message outside the cell. So here is our mRNA which comes out. Outside the nucleus, you have endoplasmic reticulum which has ribosomes. On this ribosomes, the mRNA sits. With the help of tRNA, which is another type of RNA, it transfers the amino acid to this position. What is this? This is a amino acid. So one by one, tRNA carries amino acid forming a chain, forming it into a protein chain. So what could these protein be? Various proteins. For example, it could be a insulin, which is a hormone to bring down the level of glucose in the blood. So on this basis of understanding that cellular organelles also can interact, we see that each and every organ on behalf of that starts interacting. We see here, this is our brain. Brain sends certain message to the heart. So heart starts pumping blood. This blood, so it comes like this. This heart pumps blood to the kidney for purification and urine synthesis. But after the amount of urine is being formed, the left out blood is taken back to the heart again. Similarly, brain gives instruction to the lungs to breathe and get oxygen, and heart pumps its deoxygenated blood to the lungs, and lungs pushes back oxygenated blood. Oxygenated blood is given to all parts of the body. Similarly, we are moving to all the other parts also. We eat food through our mouth, which passes through the esophagus, comes down into the stomach and goes and gets digested, and feces comes out. But the nourishment is taken in the blood. So in short, if I have to tell, every single organ in our body is coordinating and interacting with each other, because of which we can happily and safely continue our living system. So these are certain very important characteristics of a living organism. Now that living organisms is understood, a bigger picture is to be understood now. The bigger picture is living world. Have you all ever imagined how many organisms exist in the entire world? There are approximately 1.7 to 1.8 million organisms minus all the microorganisms. It is very difficult to count the number of microorganism species. So here is only multicellular organisms which we have counted. This refers to understand that biodiversity. Huge biodiversity we have, uncountable kind. Some are even extincting even before we understand they exist amongst us. So, to understand this, it is very important that we categorize the whole organisms. To start off with, we start naming. Now, name is something which is very unique to any person, any individual, any organism. But when we come to the linguistic barriers from one language to another, the name of an organism starts varying. So, in scientific world, it became very, very important that we must have very unique name which can be used by the entire world. So came the word nomenclature. And how do you proceed with the nomenclature? First and foremost, we need to identify any organism around us. After we have identified the organism, we have to collect or describe the characters of the organism. After that, we need to classify them. Once we classify, we are going to name it or give the nomenclature of it. So, these are the steps for any kind of identification to nomenclature. So, first we identify, describe, classify, and then finally name it. So, who was the first person to come up with such a naming system? It was Carolus Linnaeus. Carolus Linnaeus came up with an excellent system, what is called as binomial nomenclature. Bi means two, name system. This two name system was approved by the entire world. In case of plants, it is approved by International Code for Botanical Nomenclature, or in short we call it as ICBN. And in case of zoology, it is conducted or coded by International Code for Zoological Nomenclature. So, in short, it is ICZN. In this system, there are certain rules. Now, let us take an example to understand. The best and always a specific example we first understand is Mangifera indica, common name mango. When we are writing any binomial nomenclature, as I told, there are going to be two names. The first name signifies the genus, or what we call it as generic name, and the second name signifies the species or the specific epithet. Mangifera indica, the first alphabet of the generic name is always capital. Rest, if you see, everything is in small letters. Always when you are writing, the two names should be underlined separately. But when we are typing, we do not underline the two names, but we form it in italics. If we want to give significance to the founder or the discoverer, we generally write the person's name in short, like Linnaeus, we write it in Lin and put a small dot beside it. These are certain rules of nomenclature. Binomial name, two parts, generic name, specific epithet. Generic name starts with capital, specific epithet starts with small. When you are writing, you have to underline it separately, but when you are typing, it should be in italics. So, these are certain rules for nomenclature. So, we can see in this given pic that genus and species together forms the binomial nomenclature. But before we come to the actual naming system, we need to classify. As I told, the first step is identification, then describe, and then you have to classify. This classification is done in terms of ranks or categories. If we see here, the ranks or categories are species, genus, family, order, class, phylum, and kingdom. Together it is called as taxonomical hierarchy, because each of them is called as taxon. So, what is taxon? Species is a taxon, genus is a taxon, family is a taxon, order is a taxon. So, each of them is individually a taxon. So, in short, shall I say, unit of classification is represented as the word as taxon. So, let us try to understand this and memorize this. Always remember that species is the smallest part and the largest part is kingdom. So, there is a standard mnemonics what we remember for this. King Philip came over for ginger soup. So, king stands for kingdom. Philip stands for phylum. Came stands for class. Over stands for order. For stands for family. Ginger stands for genus. And finally, soup stands for species. So, kingdom is the largest taxon and the smallest taxon is species. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Phylum is a terminology that we use for animals. In plants, this is called as division. Others are same for both plants and animals. So, one by one we are going to understand these. So, the first one what we are going to understand is species. Species can be defined as group of individual organisms with fundamental similarities. One species should be all closely related and they have similar morphological conditions. But the moment we are moving from species to a genus, it is a group of species what we call it as genus. So, group of related species which has more characters in common is called as genera or species. Let us take example. Potato and brinjal. Both of them come under the genus Solanum. Lion, leopard, tiger. All this come under the genus Panthera. So, what do you understand? Species is each individual or rather individual type of species, but genus is group of species which are interrelated. Then comes a group of genus. Group of genus is a little bigger part, what we call it as family. So, they are related generas or related genus. So, the characteristic feature gradually starts decreasing. So, let us take an example. Solanum, just now we saw potato and brinjal comes under this. Petunia and datura are placed in the family Solanaceae, whereas genus Panthera, just now we saw lion, leopard, comes under this category, along with the genus Felis, which is the cat family, forms into a family called as Felidae. So, gradually we are increasing our position in the taxonomical hierarchy. Next came order. Order is even more higher taxon when compared to family. So, they exhibit even few similarities. So, if I have to define order, a group of related families is called as order. Example, families like Convolvaceae, Solanaceae come under the same order called as polynomials. This was all done based on the floral characteristics. What is floral characteristics? Type of androecium, type of gynoecium, they were related. In animals, Carnivora is a order which consists of Felidae and Canidae. Felidae, just now we saw examples as tiger, leopard, cat. Canidae, examples such as wolf and dogs. These all together form one order. Then comes class. A group of related order forms class, but common features are even more lesser. So, one example here I would like to highlight is Primata. Monkey, gibbon, gorilla is a class of Mammalia in general we are putting under. So, order monkey, gibbon, gorilla also is coming in Mammalia, whereas Carnivora order is also coming under Mammalia, meaning to say mammals. Human is also coming, ape is also coming, tiger, elephant, everything is coming under the same class Mammalia. So, you can see here so many examples. A zebra is there, can't make out this much. Then you can see here a whale is there, elephant is there, kangaroo is there. So, this looks like a deer, wolf, rabbit, bat, so many organisms. They all come under the same classification as class. Then comes phylum. We use the word phylum in case of animals, and in case of plants we use division. So, animals in case of phylum, and division we use it in plants. So, a group of related class is known as phylum or division. Now, look at this. Just now we considered our understanding of Mammalia. So, mammals were put. Along with mammals, when we are having fishes, reptiles, birds, everything comes under the same phylum. So, classes comprising animals like fishes, amphibians, reptiles, birds, all together forms into mammals. This is called as phylum. The last category what we are going to understand here is kingdom. Huge. Nowadays we are following 5 kingdom classification. This was proposed by a scientist named R.H. Whitaker. The first one comes is Monera. All the bacteria come under this. Then comes Protista. In this, unicellular organism but eukaryote. In bacteria, they are also unicellular but they are prokaryotes. Then came Mycota, the fungi. Then plants, and finally the animals. These are the 5 kingdoms what we have. We do not consider viruses, hence virus is not placed under any of them. So we can see here group of all the division is called as Plantae kingdom. So all divisions come under this, and group of all phylums or phyla forms into animal kingdom. So like this we have completed our taxonomical hierarchy. But we would accept to the fact that the taxonomical hierarchy is so large that we need certain help, certain aid to understand them better. So taxonomical studies of various species of plant, animals and other organisms are useful for understanding in terms of agriculture, forestry, industry and in general to understand the entire diversity. We take help of certain aids such as Botanical Garden, Herbarium, Monograph, Museum, Zoological Park, keys, Flora and manuals. So these all taxonomical aid together will help us understand the entire diversity more easily. The first taxonomical aid what we are going to learn is museum. It is simple that any school or college generally has certain labs where we maintain a biological museum. Here generally plants and animal species are stored and collected. They are either dried or they are dead animals and plants which is being stored in jars. Then we move on to herbarium. Herbarium are plant species only we can store here because we collect the plant, dry it, press it and stick it on a sheet and then we are classifying it. You can see in these pictures, like here we have seen the twig of a plant along with certain extra flowers are being dried and pressed and stuck on the sheet. Along with that, they maintain certain small little records. The largest botanical garden, Royal Botanical Garden in Kew, England, has the largest herbarium in the entire world. Then comes Botanical Garden. We all would agree that museum and herbarium has a drawback. The drawback is I cannot see living organisms over there. I can always find the important date where it was collected, place of collection and certain characteristic feature. But I will never get a hands-on experience on it. How it lived, how it is surviving, what are the conditions it is undergoing. For all this purpose, Botanical Garden is important, where we are seeing living plants. So again, Royal Botanical Garden, Kew, England is the largest botanical garden in the entire world. In India, we have two important botanical gardens, which is the larger ones, Indian Botanical Garden, Howrah, India, and National Botanical Research Institute, Lucknow in India. Other than this, every state or district wise, there are smaller botanical gardens. Next taxonomical aid what we are going to learn is key. In key, we don't store any material like we stored in case of museum and herbarium as dried and dead organism. In botanical garden, we could store living plants. In a zoological park, we can store animals, live animals, but in key, we are not storing. But it is a question answer session what we are trying to understand and identify a organism. In key, it is completely based on contrasting characters, generally what we say as couplets. Now, we will try to understand key with an example. Now, there is an organism that comes to me. Say there is an organism X. I don't know what that organism is. So, you will ask me a first question. Can the organism swim? The answer is either yes or no. If I say no, then I consider it is not a fish. If it is yes, it could be a fish. Assuming the answer is no, you ask me the next question. Can it fly? Again, the answer could be either yes or no. If the answer is yes, it could be a bird. If the answer is no, it is not a bird. So like this, say I ask another question. Then you will ask me a question. Does it have two legs? Your answer may be yes or no. If it is no, we consider it is not a human being. If the answer is yes, it is a human. So, assuming it is of two legs, it can't fly, it can't swim, my answer is X is a human. So, here is a contrasting characters what we are trying to tell it as yes and no. This is a couplet. So, what is a couplet? Every time the answers come in yes and no pattern, asking questions, we reach to an answer. And every question here is called as a lead because it is leading and making us reach to our answer. The next type of taxonomical aid we are going to understand is flora. Flora, the word signifies flowers. Here we are signifying it as a plant. We are taking count of all the in a given habitat, all the plants being present and maintain its record, and that's called as flora. So if someone comes to me and tells what are the different types of plants present in Bangalore, I can answer it immediately looking into the index of Bangalore. Now just having an index of the plant, will that be helpful? No, I would like to have certain details behind it. The details is called as manuals of the same area. And when I am just not looking at only plants or only animals, but each and every taxon, species, genus, family and so on, we call it as monographs. So like this, we finish all the types of taxonomical aids. So in today's class, we have understood the characteristic features of living organism which makes us so different from a non-living thing. They are growth, reproduction, metabolism, consciousness and interaction. Then we also understand the word nomenclature given by Carolus Linnaeus after identification. But in between identification to nomenclature, we have taxonomic categories to be formed into species, genus, family, order, class, phylum or division and kingdom. All this is understood best with the help of taxonomical aids such as museum, herbarium, botanical garden, zoological parks, key, flora, manual and monographs. So I hope you are clear with the chapter. Now if we are clear, the next work what we must do is reinforce all the concepts what we have understood. So for that we will do few questions as homework. So I hope you can note down the questions. So the first question is, cell acquire and use energy to synthesize, store and degrade and eliminate substances through chemical reactions called metastasis, respiration, metabolism, homeostasis. Second question is, metabolism comprises of digestion of food, exchange of gases, elimination of waste and various energy exchanges in cell. Third question, metabolism can be defined as 1. Is the sum of all chemical activities of an organism. 2. Is characteristic of plants and animal kingdom only. 3. Result from an increase in number of cell. 4. Does not take place in procedures. Fourth question, growth in living being is called 1. Secretion, 2. Interaction, 3. Aggregation, 4. Increase in volume. Question number 5. Plants differ from animals in having 1. Definite lifespan, 2. Localized growth, 3. Indefinite growth, 4. Localized growth and indefinite lifespan, 6. An increase in size or number of cells best describes 1. Homeostasis, 2. Biological growth, 3. Asexual reproduction, 4. Chemical level of organization. Question number 7. First act in taxonomy is naming, description, classification, identification. Question 8. Systema Naturae was written by Charles Darwin, Carolus Linnaeus, John Ray, Aristotle. Ninth question. In binomial nomenclature, both genus and species, the letter is capital. Both genus and species are printed in italics. Genus and species may be of same name. Genus is written after the species. Question 10. Which is the lowest level of classification? Animals. Genus, order, species, class. The basic unit of taxonomy, biological classification is species, genus, phylum, order. Which of the following is not a well-defining property of living organism is your 12th question. Answers are growth, interaction, metabolism, consciousness. Question number 13. The largest herbarium in the world is Royal Botanical Garden, 2. Indian Botanical Garden, 3. National Botanical Research Institute, 4. Indian Botanical Research Institute. Question number 14. Museums have the collection of 1. Living species, 2. Dead species, 3. Living plant specimens, 4. Living animal specimens. Question 15. Dried compressed plant twigs on a paper sheet are 1. Slide, 2. Botanical garden, 3. Bottle specimen, 4. Herbarium. I hope you all will do your homework in the best way. Not understanding, you can refer back to the video again and we will discuss the questions in the next session. All the best, students.